Hello, class. Welcome to this first lecture in ethics. Um, I will be introducing you to the textbook, at least in the first part of the course. It's entitled Ethics, a Class Manual in Moral Philosophy. It's written by Monsignor Paul Glenn. Um, I hope it's explicit to you. It's obvious to you that this comes from a specific tradition. It's called the scholastic tradition, which is I'm going to say, the philosophical tradition that is characteristic of Catholic philosophy. I say it comes from a Catholic background. So yes, we will be approaching this subject from a specific standpoint, but critical. Take note, as Hans Georg Gadamer has always reminded us. For example, in Truth and Method, nobody comes from a presuppositionless perspective. We always bring into any inquiry as a body of presuppositions, a body of biases that we cannot eliminate. We have to accept that they're there, but we have to be explicit that they're there, that they color our judgment, that they can color our judgment, that humility is necessary in the quest for truth. So, again, this is the textbook for the first part of the course. Of course, you will still be introduced to different editions in ethics. Um, I think it is worth starting with one of the most established and systematic, I might say, traditions in ethics. It's called um, scholasticism. We could call it that. What's scholasticism? It's the tradition um, out of which Thomas Aquinas emerged. He was a medieval philosopher and theologian, and he has been really impactful, at least to me, and to so many people out there. He is, we might say, he's called ano lang, a great synthesizer because he brings together Greek philosophy of Aristotle. He weds that with some Augustinian Christian, I would say, modifications and a rich system, really, of the not just Augustine, but all of the patristics. Who were the examining patristics? These are the church fathers, okay, the early theologians in the history of the church. They are thought to be the early interpreters of the Christian message preached by the apostles. Therefore, usually, at least in the Catholic tradition, their writings are treated as important, as context by which to understand, for example, the scriptures and Christian theology in general. Now, as I said, um, you do not need to be Christian. You do not need to be Catholic in order to pass this course. What I need you to do is to understand whether you agree with this or not. What matters is you understand the position that is presented by the word. It's presented by the author. There will be other authors that we'll be examining who do not come from this tradition. We'll be studying secular uh, perspectives on ethics, for example. Um, more on that next time. Okay. But for now, I will introduce you to this one. So, we will skip this one, this part where he talks, this preface where he expresses how he tries to make this text pedagogically, let's say, sound by making it easy to understand, by making it um, filled with illustrations, by making it reasonably complete and self-standing as a textbook for a semester. So I suggest really that you just read the entire book from cover to cover. That's my suggestion. And then along the way, we will dive deeper into each part, step by step. I will help you with that. But Gadamer has said that you can only understand the part if you understand the whole. Therefore, I suggest that you get a glimpse of the entire book first, and then slowly, we will be going through each part piece by piece. Hopefully, with hopefully with you bringing with as your background knowledge, like the skeleton of the entire book, right? So that's my suggestion. So please do read the entire book. All right. So I will introduce you to the introduction of the book. I will leave to you the study of the outline, the table of contents that should be have to take a look at. Okay, so it's for you to study. Let's begin with the introduction. So in the introduction, Paul Glenn has written 4 different sections. First is the definition of ethics, then the object of ethics. What's the object? What it is about? Okay, what object? What's the object of the action, for example, right? It's that towards which, for example, the action is directed to, right? For example, what's the object of, for example, I'm holding this cup. What's the object of the holding? It's the cup, right? Like that. Object is divided, by the way, in the material object and the formal object. More on that later. Then we have, then we will talk about the importance of ethics, and then in the classification of the, you would say, subfields, branches, we might say, of ethics. Okay, so let's begin with the first part. Okay, right off the bat, he begins with a definition of ethics, which he will tease out step by step. He says, ethics is the practical science of the morality of human conduct. Right. Ethics is the practical science of the morality of human conduct. He will break that down step by step. If that is a bit opaque to you, that's okay, because we have not yet pieced it out. Let's begin with the first word, the first characteristic of ethics, which is that ethics is a science. Okay, what does that mean? To understand that, we must understand what a science is, right? When we say ethics is a science, we need to understand what a science is. He says here, a science is a relatively complete and systematically arranged body of connected data, together with the causes or reasons by which these data are known to be true. Simply put, a science is a body of knowledge, right, which has specific ideas, propositions that are interlinked, interconnected with each other, in a coherent way, right? Such that one part of one piece of that body of system, the system or body, explains the rest, right? It's a picture of reality, I might say. That's a science in the German sense, at least, because in the contemporary or modern sense of the word science, owing to, for example, Francis Bacon, the focus now is on the experimental verification of the conclusions of the science. For example, you can think of chemistry, biology, where the means by which truth is acquired is primarily through experimentation. That's another sense. That's the modern sense of the word science. But here, Monsignor Paul Glenn is talking about the German sense, I might say, of the word science. Okay, as a relatively complete and systematically arranged. Take note of the keyword there, relatively complete. Because, for example, Aquinas would say that yes, philosophy, the natural philosophy, in short, the sum total of the set of propositions or sentences, ideas that you arrive at using just your natural reason, that is a science in itself. That's natural science. But he also speaks of theology, which is also a science, which is also self-standing, which is humanity's reflection on divine revelation, that which God reveals, for example, according to Catholicism, in scripture and tradition. So that's also a science. So that's why we say a science is relatively complete. it is complete to the extent that it is like we might say independent. It can stand on its own. But that doesn't mean that other sciences do not exist that can complement, okay, ethics as a science. All right, I hope that's clear. A science is a relatively complete and systematically arranged body of connected data together with the causes or reasons by which these data are known to be true. So in short, the body of knowledge in a science are not just presupposed to be true, right? Instead, the reason by which we know them to be true is also part of that science. Okay, the rationalization, the justifications. Okay, so that's science. This is the German sense that Monsignor Paul Glenn is talking about here. And he contends that ethics fits under the definition of science. Okay? Ethics is a complete and relatively complete and systematically arranged body of data which relate to the morality of human conduct. So now he uses the definition of a science and applies it to ethics. Thus, that ethics as a science has a particular focus, right? Just as other sciences also have their own distinct focus, right, or unique focus. Ethics is still a science, yes, but it is a science with a particular focus. Okay, what's the focus? The morality of human conduct. More on that later. But the focus here now, as of now, is that ethics fits in the definition of a science. Because it is a science, it is a complete and systematically arranged body of data which relate to the morality of human conduct. And it presents the reasons, okay? The justifications why we know that such data about the morality of human conduct, about whether an action is good or bad, is true. In short, we do not like pound the table here and say that is wrong, that is right. No, we do not do that. We do not assume. Instead, we study as well the reasons by which we arrive at our evaluations as to the morality of an act. Okay? Because ethics fits in that definition of a science, therefore ethics is science. Right. Again, let's revisit the definition. Ethics is the practical science of the morality of human conduct. The science part there hopefully is now clear to you. Let's now proceed with the modification, the qualifier that is a practical science. Okay, take note what's being excluded here. But you take note, if you have studied logic, and even if you haven't, take note that when you modify a term like science, okay, and you add, for example, practical science, there's a need to specify because there's a need to exclude an alternative specification. For example, with this practical science, you are doing that to exclude something else, another type of science. What type of science? Speculative science. Okay, so science can either be practical or speculative or theoretical. In a speculative science, your focus is just to know something. It's intellectual. That's the focus, the purpose. Whereas in the practical science, as we can see, as we shall see, the focus is on how to act well, how to study. You study the data and the reasons for the data in that body of knowledge to guide action. That's the key idea there. In a practical science, the focus is on how that data guides how you should think, how you should act. All right. So here, Monsignor Paul Glenn talks about ethics as a practical science. If the data of a science directly imply rule or directions for thought or action, the science is called practical. But if you say practical, that means it's the reasonable thing to do, right? The focus is on the action part. It's not primarily on like just knowing the ideas of different philosophers and ethics for its own sake. It's not knowledge for its own sake primarily, but it's action. Okay, reasonableness of the action. Okay, if the data of a science enrich the mind without directly implying rules or directions, the science is called speculative. So that's what we talked about earlier. For example, we have it's an example of speculative science. Um, Metaphysics. What's metaphysics? Metaphysics is the study of the sum of reality as such, right? What are the principles, the principles that underlie motion, for example? What are the principles that what are the metaphysical constitutions of, like, for example, oranges? According to Aristotle, an orange, for example, an orange tree has a substance and an accident part, right? The accident has um, an accidental form and an accidental matter. The substance has the substantial form, substantial matter. In short, knowing such information does not directly imply how you should live or think, how you should position, how you should act in the world. Okay, if you know it, that's good, but it doesn't directly tell you or guide you how to act. Doesn't compel you to do something if you are to be reasonable, if you are to be reasonable. Ethics is not like that. Ethics is not primarily speculative science. It's primarily a practical science. Okay, it's practical because it compels you, once you already understand the reason for the um for example, for believing that a certain action is wrong, then it automatically tells you not to do it, right? So it's practical. If ethics, if your study of ethics brings you to the conclusion that a certain act is, you're obliged to do a certain act at that time, then you should do it, right? It's not like um ethics is just a food for the mind, food for the brain. It's not like that. It's not speculative in that way. It's practical. A speculative science, it says, presents truths that are to be known. A practical science presents truths that are to be acted upon. Okay, focus again. A practical science is action. A speculative science enlarges our knowledge and enhances our cultural equipment. In short, for example, if you are able to memorize the different masterpieces of literature, it raises your cultural capital, your social capital, right? Because you become a cultured or educated human being. But that end is primarily theoretical, right? Practical science gives us knowledge of and gives us knowledge with definite guidance. That's the keyword there. That's the keyword here. It guides you into how to act in a certain way, right? Now, the science of ethics presents data which directly, wait, am I recording? People have it down. Just making sure, right? Ethics is therefore a practical science because it fits the definition of a practical science, which is that it's a science which presents data which directly imply and indicate directions for human action, for human conduct. All right. All right. So now it's really clear that ethics is a practical science, but it's a practical science of what? What does it primarily study? Ethics is a science of human conduct. What does that mean? What is human conduct? When we say human conduct, he says, we mean only such a human activity is deliberate, only such human activity as is deliberate and free. Okay. So he distinguishes between human acts, right, which constitute human conduct, and acts of man, which do not constitute, right, human conduct as studied in ethics. So what's the major difference between acts of man and human acts? Human acts making or constituting human conduct is this, okay? Deliberate and free. The keyword is there. But human conduct says we mean only such human activity as is deliberate and free. A deliberate and free act, an act performed with advertence and motive, and an act determined, meaning you determined it, you chose it, you gave it existence, you chose it freely, and then you did it, okay, by the free will. is called the human act. Okay. So in short, for example, if you like, for example, um, you blinking. Yes, you can blink consciously, but normally you do not consciously do it. You just automatically do it. Is that a human act? No, that is not human act. Um, Automatically done or subconsciously done acts are not human acts. A properly human act, in short, an act that is proper to human being, a human, sorry, an act that is proper to a human being is an act that flows from his rational and free nature. Take note, Monsignor Paul Glenn is coming from the scholastic tradition, primarily of Aquinas, which believes that human beings are rational animals. We have an intellect and a will. Okay? Human beings are beings that have intellect, the power to know reality, and a will, the freedom to choose, right? And therefore, even if we do many things, only a subset of those actions are proper to man. In short, are really expressive of who you really are. Okay, it's those actions that are human acts. Okay? It's those actions that are like thought through and then acted upon freely. Decide after a clear deliberation. Okay, that's a human act. It's called a human act because it's proper to a human being. It's done as like, yeah. I have this clear now. Acts performed by free will is called acts performed by human beings without advertisement or without the exercise of free choice are called acts of man. So there are acts of man, really. What are acts of man? These are actions that you just do without proper thinking and without really deciding to do. These are acts of man. These are not human acts. Human acts in the technical sense of actions that are proper to a human being. Okay, human acts are free and deliberate. They're decided upon. Okay? They're freely chosen. Acts of man are not. For example, you decide to study ethics. For example, to become a good person. Is that an act of man? Is that a human act? It's a human act because it's a conscious choice. If you really chose it, I'm I'm not forcing you to become a good person. I'm not forcing you to study this one. To the to a very deep. Of course, this is a GE subject. This is a minor subject. You can decide just to put this to the side, but I suggest you do not do that because if there's one thing that's important in your whole life, it's about how to live well. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living," right? And this subject precisely does the examination of your life. It can make or break your entire life. Ethics treats of human acts. Human acts make human conduct, and therefore, ethics is a science of human conduct. Okay, so there's almost like a syllogism there. Ethics, he says, studies what? Acts of man or human acts? It studies human acts. Now, human acts constitute human conduct. Your conduct is a sum of your habits, okay? Your habits that characterize who you are come out of the individual human acts that you do. Your freely chosen, your deliberately done actions. They constitute your conduct. Ethics studies that. Okay. So ethics is a science of human conduct. Now, let's go back to the definition. Okay. The broad definition presented earlier is that ethics is the practical science of moral conduct. Oh, sorry, if of human conduct. No, ethics is the practical science of the morality of the human conduct. Okay, it's very specific. Again, the focus here is in the morality side. What does that mean? Uh, Monsignor Paul Glenn says human conduct is free, knowing, deliberate human activity. You already know that, right? Because human acts are freely done, they're done with full knowledge, they're really deliberate. That's human act, right? And human acts constitute human conduct. Such activity is either in agreement or disagreement with the dictates of reason. So it's not automatic that a human act is automatically good just because you freely do it, just because you did it with full consent or full knowledge. It's not automatically good. Some human acts are bad. Okay. Now, which of human actions are good and which human actions are bad? Okay. It says here, Senior Paul Glenn says, such activity is either in agreement or disagreement with the dictates of reason. This is the crucial part. Some actions cohere with what you should do at that specific circumstance, right? And you know that by using your common sense, by using your reason. And some actions are irrational. Okay. Some human acts are not what you should do if only you were reasonable at the time. All right. And those are the bad actions. So follow your reason, listen to your reason. Does your reason tell you to do a specific action? So in short, follow your conscience, listen to your reason. If after careful consideration, that's what reason tells you to do, that's a good reason. If not, if it's the opposite of what reason demands us to do at that specific point, at a specific circumstance, then you violated the dictates of reason. It's immoral. It's not moral. It's morally bad action. Okay. So he says here, now the relation, the agreement or disagreement, the relation of human activity with the dictates of reason is called morality. What's the morality of an action? It's whether it's about it's the deciding factor as to whether the human act coheres with, aligns with what reason demands you to do or not. An action is moral if it's done in a way that is aligned to what reason tells us to do at that specific instance. An action is immoral if it disagrees, if it violates, if it runs counter to what reason tells you to do at that specific circumstance. All right. It says here, ethics studies human activity to determine what it must be to stand in harmony with the dictates of reason. Hence, ethics deals with the morality of human conduct. All right. The focus of ethics is what? The focus of ethics is what aspect of human conduct? It's the morality of the human conduct. It evaluates. Okay. Ethics focuses on the evaluation of whether an action is good or bad. All right. That brings us to the etymology of ethics as presented by Monsignor Paul Glenn. It says here, the name ethics is derived from the Greek word ethos, which means characteristic way of acting. It's conduct, basically, right? What it's your like it's who you are based on what you do, basically. It's your ethos. That's his, for example, when we say his work ethic. What's your work ethic? It's your tendon, let's say proclivities in how you work. Okay. That is unique to you. Okay. But it's really you that constitutes, like we might say, your identity, at least in that sphere of life. What's your ethos? Now, it says here, the characteristic mark of human conduct is found in the deliberate use of the will. Now, this is very, very crucial. We're talking about human conduct. It's not animal conduct. If the focus of the science is animal conduct and non-human animals do not have the same extent, at least in the scholastic assumption, do not have the same extent of intellect and free choice of will that human beings do. And therefore, the characteristic actions that flow out of that non-rational nature is different from the actions, the types of actions that naturally flow from the being of humans. We have this principle in scholastic metaphysics, which is called agere sequitur esse. Okay? For example, W. Norris Clark, in his introduction to scholastic metaphysics, talks about this principle, which is agere sequitur esse. What does that mean? It's that action follows being. Action flows from being. What does that mean? How you act flows from the type of being that you are. Okay? For example, it's natural for cats to meow. It's not natural for them to bark. Okay? Their action flows from the type of being they are. So the question here, the crucial question here is that what is that? So the characteristic way of acting of a cat is to meow, right? Instead of bark. It's its characteristic way of acting. We might say, in a sense, in an analogous sense, cats are immoral when they, for example, no, yeah, no, it's but yeah, it's really bad to use the language of brands. That will just introduce confusion. Never mind. But just understand this that when we speak of ethos, is the characteristic way of acting. What's the feline ethos? What's felines? That of cats, right? What's the feline ethos? Is the meow. It's the canine ethos is to bark. Canine dog. Okay. What's the um what's the ethos of a mango tree? What its characteristic way of acting is to grow, right? And bear fruit. It's its characteristic way of acting. But what's the characteristic way of acting of a human being? Take note. What's the being? What's the nature of a human being? Because that's where its characteristic way of acting flows, right? Agere sequitur esse. Action follows being. So it says here, because human beings are rational animals. They have intellect and free will, and therefore, because that's the being of human beings, the action that flows from that is proper to the human being must use fully that intellect and that will. When that intellect and that will is not utilized fully to its full potential, then you are doing something that is not fully reflective of you, who you are as a human being. Okay? So what's the characteristic way of acting of a human being? It's that, it says here, is found in the free and deliberate use of the will. In a word, this characteristic is found in human acts. Okay? The actions that manifest that really reflect your being as a human being are not like, for example, blinking, are not like sleepwalking. We do not deliberate on that. But it's in the conscious decisions that you make every day. Should I steal this money? Should I cheat her? Should I tell the truth or not? Will I, even if it will hurt my friend? So that's it. So those freely done conscious acts that we can find your characteristic way of acting. It's not in the mundane acts that can be done by other creatures that are not human. It's in the acts that can only be done by human beings. In those acts can we find the characteristic way of acting that is unique in certain evils. Thus, you perceive that the name ethics is suitably employed to designate the science of human acts. Human acts constituting human conduct. Now, let's disentangle ethics from morality. It says here, remember, ethics comes from ethos, which is a Greek word, right? Morality, on the other hand, comes from um, the Latin word mos, which has the stem more. Okay, more morality, right? More um, is the stem of the word mos, which is the equivalent of the Greek word ethos. Hence, it says here, we understand why ethics is sometimes called moral science or philosophy, or just um, yeah, moral philosophy. That's it. Okay, so that's the definition of ethics. Ethics is what? Ethics, to sum up, is the practical science of the morality. I hope that that very, very foundational definition is already clear to you. If not, then feel free to pause this video and listen to the discussion beforehand. Let's proceed with the second part, the second section on in this introduction. It now brings us not to the definition of ethics, but to the object which ethics studies, to that which it is about. Okay, that's the object. Every science, he says, has a material object and a formal object. Okay, object is take note what it's about, right? But we can further distinguish between the material object and the formal object. Material object is the subject matter of the science. In short, the topics. What's a topic? What's the topic of that science? What is that science about? What does it tackle? The thing or the things with which the science deals. That's the material object. What's the material object of ethics? It's the human acts. Okay, that is to say, human conduct. Okay, the acts that flow from the nature of human beings as beings with intellect and will. That's the material object. In short, when you ask the question, what's ethics about? It's about human conduct or human acts constitute the human. That's the material object. What is the formal object of ethics? Formal object is what? The formal object of a science in general, we proceed with a specific formal object of ethics. What's the formal object of a science in general? It's the special way, aim, or the point of view that the science employs in studying or dealing with its material object. In short, yes, that's the material object. That's what it's about. But in what specific angle does this science focus? Okay, the specific angle, the aim, the width, yeah. Because when we say it's about something, that's still very broad, right? You need to specify that to a laser sharp focus. The formal object for science is that specific angle unique to that science. It's not generic, it's focused on this particular angle to that topic. So in ethics, yes, remember, the material object of ethics is what? Human acts, right? Or human thought. But what's the primary focus? It's to discover what? It's to discover what these must be in order to agree with the dictates of reason. That's the aim. Okay? In short, you study human acts in ethics. Why? You do the study. Why? For a practical purpose, right? To know which of the human actions that you study agree with or cohere with the dictates of reason. In short, you study ethics, you study human acts to know which of these acts are those that you should do, right? You study the guidelines, the roadmap, you might say, of the good life. Okay, this is the specific focus. It's not just studying human acts in general. You do not study human acts to psychoanalyze them. That's the focus of psychology, for example. Instead, your focus, even if that includes psychoanalysis, that can include ethics, can include that. But the focus now is in looking at whether that action is moral or not, whether it follows the dictates of reason, the canons of reason, or right. Hence, the special aim in the point of view of ethics is the right morality or the rectitude of human acts. It's the evaluation. Okay? It's the evaluation whether the human acts that we're talking about align with or violate the dictates of the song, whether they're reasonable or not. Okay? We assert then, he says, that the formal object of ethics is the rectitude of human acts. It's the evaluation of whether the human acts are good or not. It's the which human acts are good and which are not, and why. All right? Hope that's clear now. That's the object of ethics. Having discussed the definition of ethics, having discussed the object of ethics, let's now proceed with the importance of ethics. Why is ethics important? According to Monsignor Paul Glenn, ethics employs the marvelous study, sorry, ethics employs the marvelous faculty of human reason upon the most supremely important question of what an upright life is and must be. It is therefore noble and important science. Why is it important? It's important because it uses the peak power of human being. What's the peak power or faculty? That's what faculty simply means. What are your the sensory faculties, for example? What's the faculty? It's the power. Your sensory faculties are your power to see, right? Power to taste, power. Those are your powers. But are they the most elevated? The peak powers that are like the most elevated powers for a human being? No, it's that you have higher powers than that. These are your cognitive faculties, your intellectual faculties. What are your intellectual faculties? Your intellect and will, right? Your intellect, which is your power to know the truth, and your will, which is your power to decide what to do based on what you know. So ethics uses those two major powers, those two faculties, those two peak faculties of your intellect and will, to study the supremely important question of how to live well. So, in short, yes, it's important in the first sense, which is that it utilizes the most important powers of the human being. And at the same time, it's also, for a second reason, very, very important because it investigates the most important question that a human being could ask in his lifetime. Is that, how do you live well? How do you live a life that is not a violation of what you know to be true, of what you should know to be true, even that you're a rational being? It is therefore, he says, a noble and important science. He says, ethics furnishes the norm by which relations among men are regulated. Juridical, political, professional, social. It shows what such relations must be and indicates the reasons that require them to be so. Thus, ethics is fundamental to the sciences of law, medicine, political economy, sociology, etc. It is, in consequence of this fact, a very important science. What does it mean? It simply means that when you study ethics, you're studying the foundations, right, of the guidelines by which human beings in any field should follow, right? Ethics is therefore very foundational because it taps into the very, very core of the different sciences about how you should interact with other people in that specific field. Therefore, the ethics is important. Another reason that it is the first reason that he gave earlier was that it uses the peak powers of faculties of a human being to explore life's key questions. Is the first one. It's the very general. The second one is the reason for the importance of ethics, which lies in its being foundational to understanding the norms of the different disciplines. That's the second one. The third one is more specific to his positionality. His positionality as coming from a Catholic point of view. He says the principles of ethics are in perfect harmony with the morality of Christianity, and this fact appeals to many minds when employed as a means of approach to the demonstration of the truth of the Catholic religion. Hence, ethics is a large significance for the Catholic apologists, that is to say, for every educated Catholic. Faulty ethical theories, as well as the lack of definite ethical principles, have been and are still the cause of great disorders in the political and social world. This fact is apparent in such things as positivism, nihilism, socialism, birth control, eugenics, companion marriage, blah blah blah. So he lists reasons. He lists different ethical theories that he thinks are like wrong, right? In the sense that they violate what reason demands you to believe, right, about the morality of these issues. He says sound ethics supplies the scientific knowledge which evidences the unworthiness and unreason of such things. Ethics is therefore a science deserving of careful study. This final this final reason that Monsignor Paul Glenn gives is, we might say, evangelistic. What does that mean? Basically, to summarize, he thinks Christianity says these are the sets of things that you should do and you should not do. Ethics says that these other set of things that you should do and you must not do, parallel with what Christian theology tells you to do and not to do. This parallel, okay, makes the study of ethics potent to lead a person towards Christian theology, right? Because it provides like scaffold, we might say, in the Vygotskian sense, right? It provides a scaffold, like it provides a first step into Christian theology for the secular person, because its conclusions are parallel to the conclusions of Christian theology. But is that true though? That's his assumption, right? Well, of course, it comes from long thought. This is just not just a straight mindless assumption on his part. I'm sure that he um says this um after having thoughtfully deliberated as to whether the conclusions of ethics as a science really parallel with Christian ethics, Christian theology. Now, what do you think? Will you agree with the list of things here that he considers to be unethical? Are these really unethical, like birth control, eugenics, planned marriage? Are these really um unethical? Now, let's um for us to know later on when we tackle these issues one by one. We tackle applied ethics. We can disagree. It's very natural. It comes from a particular point of view. It is the Catholic point of view. It's the Christian. What's important here is that ethics provides you a guide, right, in thinking critically about important issues, about how to act, right, how to live in the social world. Ethics is therefore a science deserving of careful study. You can agree with this conclusion without agreeing with his premises, with the um, conviction-laden nuances that he comes from. Finally, having tackled the definition, the object, and the importance of ethics, he now proceeds with the division of ethics. He divides ethics into two major parts: general ethics and special ethics. General ethics is the study of human acts, right? And then after studying the particular human acts, you make generalizations about uh, what are the principles of morality. So here, the focus is on the general principles of morality. It's very theoretical, I'd say. Whereas special ethics, also called applied ethics, is the application of those general principles to particular um, issues, like, for example, um, issues in the family, issues in the state, issues in the world, for example. Family, for example, is um, marriage. We can talk about um, whether marriage can be dissolved by civil authorities, or yeah, that's applied ethics, or whether remarriage is an open option for those come from an abusive household, right? Or yeah, there's so many applications of general principles of ethics to particular social contexts. And this one is particularly difficult, I think, because it requires, yes, an understanding of ethics in general. That's important. That's the field of philosophy. But it also requires, this applied ethics, requires a keen awareness of the social world. It's not enough to be an armchair philosopher to be good at applied ethics. You must understand human psychology. You must understand how societies work in the micro level at the macro level, especially when we speak of international relations. That's still part of applied ethics, right? There are ethical issues there. Um, should be is there a moral? What are the moral implications of Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Ukraine, for example, is applied ethics, right? So you need social science in a sense. And personally, I come from that tradition, social science tradition. Although I also have um, an orientation to ethics through like having audited some philosophy courses, but my major is really social science, social studies. So I think this is very, very interesting. I'm looking forward to teaching this course. I'm looking forward to getting to know you, um, students, um, on site, and I hope you will heed to my suggestion, not suggestion, but my command, really, that you will really read the entire book beforehand. Um, because it will guide you in understanding the individual parts. It's called the hermeneutic circle, right? Putting together. Right? You cannot understand the whole if you do not understand the individual parts. That's a given. But also, you cannot understand each individual text, each paragraph, each sentence if you do not understand the whole. So it's a process. It's a cyclical process of slowly, slowly getting into um, the meaning of the text. Really. It's dialogical as well. We have to um, discuss a lot, really. So my technique here, my approach to teaching this class, yes, I will be lecturing as well, but it will also usually involve discussions. You have to speak in my class. Yeah, yeah, has to be participation from you. So I hope you have been introduced to this text and to the subject, which is ethics. Okay, and again, we will be using this text in this class. See you in our future meetings.